Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first of the EY series of podcasts addressing diversity and inclusion in the workplace. This podcast is being recorded and will also send a summary of hints and tips afterwards. So our intention today is not to drive a policy debate, but rather to share a range of real-world and personal views from a range of talented leaders in their field. Because everybody on the panel today is talented, even if we often doubt the fact. Indeed, will today be the day we actually get found out? Now, I jest, but today is about looking at imposter syndrome and the impact it has on performance of the firms we work for. And as you've seen from the quotes that are streaming, many of us will feel like frauds at some point in our lives. Perhaps you're actually feeling like that today. Well, rest assured, you're not alone. In the research I've been doing for today, it seems that 2 out of 3 of us will experience that feeling of imposter syndrome at some point. And that covers men and women. But part of the question today is, what is the impact of feeling like that? And does that impact affect women more than men? So, Nina, I wonder if we could get the first polling question up here, because today is about audience participation. So it would be massively helpful for us as we anchor the conversation here, if you could just answer the question you see here: which gender do you think is most impacted by imposter syndrome? And as we wait for those answers to come in, I'm just going to introduce that talented group of people who's on the panel with me today. So Liselotte Munk is the CEO of Fadata, and she's absolutely turned around that brand and raised the profitability of the company. Fabulous. Fast-track, successful career. I mean, within 10 years of graduation, this woman was a COO. The polyglot with 4 or 5 languages under her belt. I'm really going to be fascinated to know whether self-doubt has ever impacted her. Now, Orla McGrath, Global Partner Solutions Lead in Microsoft. She's forged a successful career for herself in large tech companies, Accenture, Microsoft. These are tough environments, and yet she's always stepped forward, really championing the diversity agenda. Dr. Soo Ling Lim, CEO and founder of virtual networking platform Hubbub, visiting professor of National Institute of Informatics in Japan. She is innovation personified. And I love her academic research, particularly relevant to the debate today, focusing on understanding human collaboration relating to technology. Who on this podcast today doesn't feel some self-doubt when it comes to that? And my colleague Ayman Awada, EY EMEIA Technology Consulting Lead for financial services industry. And his bio says he's passionate about technology. Well, in my dealings with him, what he's equally passionate about is liberating the talent within technology. I'm going to be fascinated to get his views today. And finally, I lead Anita Kimber. I lead our focus on transformation here at EY across EMEIA. My career spanned Asia Pacific and Europe. And this year, I was named one of the top women in fintech. And I have to tell you, I have never felt more like a fraud. So let's have a look at your answers. Fascinating there. So we do think that the people here do feel that women are more impacted by imposter syndrome. Not necessarily that they're the only ones who feel it, but a significant proportion of your quarter feel that there is an equal impact around imposter syndrome. So I'm going to be really fascinated to explore that today. So we're going to start with the personal, and then we're going to move on to the organizational impacts here. Now, if we could take the polling down, and let me start with you, Liselotte. As I said, CEO of a phenomenally successful firm. Do you recognize this concept of imposter syndrome? And given your success, I'm kind of figuring out you may have some hints and tips. You may have figured out how to deal with it.
Yeah, thank you, Anita, and thank you also for inviting me here today to discuss this very interesting and relevant topic. Given that I have chosen to work since I graduated in the financial sector and then the tech sector, I have been the only woman in a lot of meetings and a lot of organizational structure. And I would say the most typical when I was leader first time and sitting in my management team, the most typical reaction when I started saying anything was silence. And I think that was something that I needed to cope with, find out how to cope with it, because I think I found out that it was not what I was saying, but it was simply because they were not used to me. They were not used to have women in their management team. So I need to find a way in. And I would say the way that I cope with it, and I think that might be a learning that everybody can learn, that is something, how do you find yourself confident? And basically you need to start with anything you can put self in front of. Self-irony, you need to learn to laugh a little bit of yourself. You need to sometimes also admit that you were wrong and stuff like that. But it's a long journey, and you need to be very focused on it all the time. And I found out in a very young age, because I think I was 32 years when I was promoted the first time in a management team.
Those are really practical hints and tips. I love that. And Ayman, you lead a large European tech team at EY. And in the majority of tech environments, we see very few women relatively reaching senior leadership roles. So, the polling was interesting there. Lots of people seeing that there's impact for everyone. Some people seeing that there's impact more for women. What's your view, and have you ever experienced imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see the poll survey, which is actually, we tend to perceive imposter syndrome as being, more of a female phenomenon. But actually, when you look at the studies widely, and not only in technology, it is actually a phenomenon that also, hits men equally. Some studies say than female. But my own experience is. Actually, it's a question of when you're part of any minority, you tend to feel not empowered to lead the conversation in a meeting or to take initiatives, and start having unjustified doubts about yourself, because you need to surpass more barriers than let's say the average norm, if you like. So, given that technology is a male-dominated environment, and you know how EY is really committed to really go to gender balance in women in technology, but this still is a male-dominated environment. This is where you tend to see imposter syndrome affecting more female and minorities, I would say, in general than men. And this is actually has been my experience. But again, I really need to stress that it's an inclusiveness kind of issue. It's not limited to females. It's a question of how you stand from implicit cultural standards, versus a dominated culture, let's say, in male domination, and some biases can exist. But you can also find imposter syndrome in some population in technology, where you have environments which are really promoting a lot, let's say, for example, a sales culture. So you could see deep technical experts not feeling empowered, to take initiatives, start having doubt, because the norm is around, much more towards sales than, the real technology or engineering type of profile. So you need really to be careful about this being a general problem, but of course, more women in technology. So I think, it's a question of how, we behave as a community, as leaders, but I can tell it's a long journey. You need to change some of the referential of our codes about, how you promote, how we recognize people, how we behave in meetings, so it goes from really very tactical things to very, strategic things about how we need to go from that. So it requires efforts from management, and from my personal effort, if you go and do this effort to go and really empathize with some of your colleagues or teams and try to understand the issue. You can be puzzled by the results, which are really discovering new talents actually emerging just because you're taking the time to just actually solve the issue. But it requires more time and effort from leadership than that with what we say the average efforts we're doing to manage the day-to-day business. But we need to put this as becoming a priority, in general. So that has been my experience. Anita.
Thank you. That's helpful. And Orla, if I can turn to you, there's a question. As a male manager, how can I help women in my team overcome imposter syndrome? And I'm curious. You know, you work in these really large tech environments and very senior leadership role. Is it something that you have experienced, and do you see it as an inhibitor to women progressing?
Thanks, Anita. You know, I have never been very confident in my own abilities, and I can be, you know, one of my own worst enemies in terms of self-doubt. But I've actually never seen it as an inhibitor to my progression. And in some ways, it's probably been a help rather than a hindrance. And I know that might sound strange, but it's caused me to be more driven to succeed in the roles that I take on. And you know, in my 20s, when I was starting, you know, out in my career, I would look up to people who were much more senior and experienced than I was. I'd assess myself really critically against them. Honestly, it was just me playing on my own self-doubts. And at some stage, it dawned on me that it was a complete fool's errand. And I made myself stop comparing myself against impossible standards and instead just focused on taking my career one step at a time and overcoming that role and succeeding in that role. And then, you know, that helped me overcome my self-doubts. But, you know, I got to my early 30s and I had 2 young boys and I returned to work part-time. And when they were still very young, I had an opportunity to take on a new role, to lead Accenture's emerging cloud applications business for the UK and Ireland. And it was a completely new team, a new business that was growing very rapidly. And we had to establish our relationship and grow our strategy with the leading software as a service vendors in the UK market. And these were companies that I had never worked with before, technologies I was unfamiliar with, working across industries that I had never worked in. And it was a huge challenge, but also a huge opportunity. But it was very much a step into the unknown for me. And I took on this opportunity, not knowing if I could be successful in it, but with lots of self-doubt, but knowing that I would always regret it if I didn't try. And I had to accept that there were lots of things that I didn't know and I would have to learn. But equally, of course, there were lots of skills that I'd learned along the way that I could take into this new role in this new situation. And now looking back at that time that I led that business, it was truly one of the highlights of my career. And, you know, more recently, I left Accenture, a company that I had worked for 26 years, and I joined Microsoft's leadership team in the UK to lead Microsoft's partner organization. And the team that I'm responsible for manage the relationships with Microsoft's ecosystem of partners. So we have over 30,000 partner organizations that we work with, that Microsoft works with here in the UK alone. And over the course of my career, I had no experience working with Microsoft at all, except as an end user of their products. And so again, it was a very much a step into the unknown for me. And it was easy to focus all my self-doubt on all of the things that I didn't know. But again, I think it was just one of those situations where I knew I would regret it if I didn't take the opportunity and go into this role with a mindset of, you know, I can bring fresh perspectives, new ideas, external experience. And really, after that, I needed to learn it all, not know it all. And if any of you have read Satya Nadella's book called Hit Refresh, he really talks about that growth mindset, and that's how you bring that to life. So I hope that helps to sharing my experiences.
That was absolutely beautiful, and thank you for sharing so personally. There's, for those of you who are joining from the UK, there's a very popular mainstream show here called Strictly Come Dancing, which the nation tends to tune into on a Saturday night. And one of the presenters there, phenomenally successful woman who has broken new ground across broadcasting the whole of her career, Claudia Winkleman, she says that she doesn't want to work with people who don't have imposter syndrome. And I was reminded of that quote listening to you, that the fact that it's actually helped drive you in your career, that self-doubt, and has encouraged you to push forward. And I think that's really helpful to hear role model women at a senior level talk about that. And I think, Liselotte, you touched on some of the same things. So thank you for sharing so personally, and Ayman, thank you for sharing. Now, we're getting some questions in from the audience, and they're rolling in, and I encourage you to keep going with those. So I'm going to go off script here a bit, Soo Ling, and actually ask you to pick up one of the questions here. And I'd like you to relate it to yourself as well. And the question is, does imposter syndrome impact talented people in technology more? And you are a phenomenally talented person in technology. Do you see that it impacts talented people more, and particularly for you personally and the students around you, perhaps?
I think it impacts people who are more different. So not just talented in any type of person that in a group that is slightly different. And for me, I'm kind of like just not the typical that I would, people would expect. For example, when I was working in the industry, in some client meetings, I would be standing there waiting for the clients, and then they would just walk past me, not intentionally, but in an office, I'm just not looking like someone they would expect to be the manager of a project, for example. And it's forgivable, but this just happens. And then, so that's what I find. And then sometimes I'm thinking like, it's so hard to even just be myself. For example, when I started my first startup, so I was the full stack developer, have to do everything. But when I see customers, they'll be like, tell your developer to do this. And then at the start, I would have to explain, so I'm the developer. But after a while, like they just couldn't quite believe it. And then like I sometimes just give in and I'm like, fine, I'll tell my developer. And the benefit for that is sometimes I can say, my developer says this feature cannot be implemented. It's just myself. And then when I was fundraising, I remember the same thing again. So the investor is like, so who's the team and who's doing what? So then I'll be like, so we have this business person, and then I'm the developer. Then he's like, what, just you? Then he's like, this software looks like 3 people develop it. And then it was on Zoom. Then he's like, it looks like there's a cupboard behind you. Are you sure you're not hiding some like 2 or 3 guys behind there? So I know those are like jokes, but it just, it exacerbates the situation. Hope that answers the question.
It absolutely does, and fabulously brought to life. So I'm going to pick up a few more audience questions, and I'm going to start with picking up one myself, and then I'm going to come to Liselotte. But there's a question here. There's a perception that imposter syndrome impacts certain demographics more than others, and is that really true? And what I found fascinating looking at imposter syndrome from a technical perspective, as opposed to just my own lived experience, is that the original research into imposter syndrome in the 1970s was actually carried out only on women. So the original study was only on women. And I think that cemented a perception that imposter syndrome is a female thing. Now, subsequent studies have actually shown what the audience poll showed, that it impacts many people, and particularly those who are different, which is what we've established already, who perhaps looks different and don't have the role models. The difference really is not who it impacts, but how you deal with it. And I think that's what we're starting to get at from this conversation, that there are mechanisms for dealing with it, and that's, we'll come on to some of that a bit later on the organizational focus. But Liselotte, if I can come to you, there's a question. Does imposter syndrome particularly impact in technology? And if so, why?
Yes, thank you. I think if we are talking about imposter syndrome that are related to particularly women in this context, I think the reason why is very practical also. It's we have too few women that choose a technical education. So when you have building up the tech companies, it's predominantly by males. And that also means that the culture, the lingo, the structure, the product, everything is more or less developed by men. And then when you have younger women, in this case here, coming in, because we see that I think we now have at our technical university here in Denmark is 30%, 35% of the new students are women. but that's very new. Normally it was around 15% or something like that. So now we see them starting in the industry, and what I experience is there is the same uncertainty when I started in the financial sector myself. That what can they contribute with? They come with a different language because we are women. We speak more about maybe usability, customers, and so on, and less about technology. So there is a lot of uncertainty in the teams in the project where we have younger women added into. But we will later discuss how we can overcome it, because I think we can. But that's why I think there are more in the technology, because it's very lingo in industry, and it's also very difficult. And to have an intelligent dialogue, you need to have a background to have it. And even then you come in with it, you come with a different background. And I think that is something culturally and structurally we need to work with. But I think we see it particularly in the tech industry.
I think that's very true, and I appreciate that perspective. And Orla, I'd really like to come to you. You talked very personally about your career and imposter syndrome, you using and channeling that to positive effect. But how do you overcome some of the things that both Liselotte and Soo Ling talked about others having a negative perception of you personally? How have you found mechanisms to deal with that, if you have encountered that through your career?
I'm trying to think about specific examples of where I have encountered it. I've certainly found myself in situations where I'm in the room, and I would be one of a minority of women, or sometimes the only woman in the room, and you feel that it's more difficult to make your voice heard. That there is a conversation going on around you, and it's difficult to butt in. You do feel like you're butting in, and I think it does take a level of reserve and confidence in putting yourself out there to make yourself heard. I would find myself, I think, sometimes over preparing, for situations where I knew I would be a minority, and probably putting a lot more work in than other people necessarily would. So I would come in armed with the facts and the depth of knowledge that perhaps other people would have taken, that situation a lot less seriously.
I think that's something I can certainly relate to, and I have seen leaders throughout my own organisation. Interestingly, those who perhaps are from an ethnic minority background, or from an LGBTI background, or females, actually putting in more of that prep in order to overcome that. But the more women who get in, and the more people of colour who get into those positions, the less, hopefully, that will reinforce this self-doubt syndrome. So really helpful, thank you. And Ayman, I wonder if I can come. Apologies, I was on mute there. So so massive apologies. We're going on and off mute here. So Ayman, I was going to come to you and just pick up on one of the questions that's just come through, which is, do you think that part of the problem here, and part of the reinforcement around imposter syndrome, is that men and women tend to respect white males in position of authority, and that really reinforces that self-doubt?
Yeah, I think that's actually true. I mean, it was said previously by Liselotte and Orla. I mean, the tech industry has been dominated by men for a long time, and this actually starts even. I'm based in France. In engineering schools, the ratio of women in engineering schools has been actually stable around 25% for like 50 years now. So, I mean, the role models, let it be in engineering schools or in the tech industry, has always been dominated by a model of, let's say, career, which is incarnated by men. And that actually we just recently have in our society, the emergence of, all the Me Too environment, etc. So basically, this is quite recent. And if you look at historically, yes, the role models have always been, men fighting for their careers and with, very warlike, values coming in actually as the ones that should be promoted, right? And this actually has created, or at least, indirectly, let's say, the ceiling of glass, you can say, in some situations that I have experienced in my career. So I think this creates some kinds of values which are not necessarily inclusive enough. Again, not only for women but also for some kind of any minorities that need to surpass some kind of barriers to get to where it needs to get.
Fantastic. That is so true, and that wider perspective we all need to keep in mind. So I'm just going to ask one last question to Soo Ling before we go to our next polling question. We've had a question coming in around are men better at taking credit for success than women are? And is that something that you've seen happen in your environment, Soo Ling? And how have you personally dealt with that?
Well, I think not all men are like that, but it does happen more. And I think by default, that what I found for myself is if there's anything wrong, it's definitely me, even if it's like several steps away. Like, yeah, if there's any problem, it's always definitely I'm at fault. I can find some reason. Yeah, I should have done this. It's always running at the back of my head. I should have done this. I should have done that. And then I think, yeah, and for some in general, I have found that it is true for more likely for even kind of like the female colleagues that I'm like supervising or managing, like they do feel the same. Whereas for men, they could definitely more confident, definitely in tech. I can find like, for example, when we interview people to hire, you can find that very clearly, like if they are bigly involved in the project, they will say, they are leading it and all that. And that's, yeah, I find that to be true. And I think that really puts women into disadvantage because you just don't show all that you can do. And then nowadays, because I'm understanding this, so when I evaluate people, I take that into account. So what they claim to have done might be more, especially if they're female. Sometimes they're quiet, they're shy, and not true. Yeah, definitely so.
I think that's so. I think that's so true. And support needs to be provided in that environment, and we'll come on and talk about that. But we are getting so many questions rolling in. So before I go to the next polling question, I do want to hand across to Orla because we've had a really interesting question here about working part-time, and I wonder if you might pick that up.
Yeah, happy to. When I had 2 kids, I came back to work part-time, and I worked part-time for about 5 years. And that was everything from 3 days a week, 3.5 days a week, 4 days a week, 4.5, then back to 3, then et cetera, depending on the ages of my kids. And I know that for me, it was critical for me to keep me in the workplace, to be able to, have that time with my kids when they weren't at school yet. And the fact that the organization was so accommodating was really important. But I think it wasn't just an accommodating organization. I also had to make it work because I was in technology consulting. It's about being out, doing client work, being billable to clients. And so it was incumbent on me to work out with Accenture, who was my employer at that time, how we would make that work together. And I think, for example, I was speaking to one client and I said, if you have 3 days of me at my bill rate and I have a more junior person 5 days a week working for me, trust me, it will cost you the same, but you will get more value from that situation than me 5 days a week, especially when I have 2 young kids at home. And it was it was incumbent on both me and, in that case, a client, but also my employer to make that work. I think there is a huge war for talent out there in the tech sector. We all know that. And I think it's the companies that really focus on making, these different flexible arrangements working for their employees. They're the companies that will attract the right talent. But as I say, it's a two-way street. It has to be both the employer and the employee that makes that work.
Very well said, and I love that it is a combination of all of the above. And I think what we've talked about in this first section is some of the techniques that you can find from within to be able to do that. And we're going to move on now and look at the organisational perspective and get some reactions from the panellists on what they've seen successful organisations do that really encourages people to deal with self-doubt and bring the best of themselves. But before we do that, Mina, I wonder if we can go to the next polling question. So what do you think is the primary reason there are few women in senior technology positions? And that will be a fascinating one to look at. And while we do that, I just thought I'd share my own personal story around those feelings of self-doubt. And I remember really clearly as a junior project manager, I was the runner for the senior project managers, and part of our job was to keep the risk logs updated, to drive MS project and do Gantt charts and those sorts of things. And I remember really clearly that the guys in the team just were so much better than me, in my view, on the technical stuff. And they were mainly guys in the team, obviously, because I work in a tech environment. And at that stage, I'm not particularly young. So going back, there weren't many women. And these guys were absolutely fantastic at the technical, and their MS projects were just pages and pages long and fantastic. And I just suffered massive self-doubt that I wasn't good enough. And it just worried me constantly that I kept getting asked to go on projects above them. And I just thought, I am going to get found out because my technical skills aren't as great as those. And then a fabulous, fabulous female boss reassured me. She understood what was happening. She reassured me and told me, Anita, they may be engrossed in the technical, but they're engrossed in themselves. What you're looking at is the bigger picture. You're looking at the people dimensions as well as the technology dimensions here. And that's why you keep getting asked to be on projects and why you're doing well. And that self-confidence and that really explicit intervention from another woman who understood what I was going through and really helped me, it changed something in me. And it's a long time ago, but you can tell that it still has an impact on me. And I still draw back on that, those moments of continued self-doubt, because we all continue to get them, that you have strengths, and you may not have strengths across everything, but you really do need to build on the strengths that you have and deploy those to good effect. So Nina, let's have a look at the results from this fascinating question and hope we can answer the question, why are there fewer women in senior technology positions? Gosh, we've got a range there, and you'd expect that, right from a masculine workplace culture. And I'm pleased to see that that's perhaps not as strong as it would have been a few years ago, and certainly more work to do. And we'll address that in the next section. But a range of things. Imposter syndrome, preventing people from applying. So it's actually self-selecting out. Dominance of men in senior roles. So that lack of role models, and I'm really going to come on to that next. And pipeline of female candidates from a STEM background is too low. And of course, we've got Soo Ling on the panel as well. And I'm sure that Orla and Liselotte and Ayman will have views on that. So thank you, a really interesting perspective there. So let's move on to the second section of our podcast today, which is really looking at the organizational impacts and the fact that this is not good for anybody if people are holding themselves back from imposter syndrome. So Orla, let's continue with you actually. Do you think that those lack of senior role models that we saw reflected on that survey there contributes to, it becomes cyclical, that it contributes to that lack of self-belief because you don't see people who look like you?
Yeah, I spoke to a number of colleagues regarding this question to see if I could get some insights and some feedback from them. And interestingly, the general feedback was it doesn't necessarily contribute to a lack of self-belief, but it does mean that your career experience is probably different and more isolating when you don't have those role models and coaches who you can identify with. And, you know, I was really interested by a comment that one BAME colleague made to me, and he said, what if, you know, what it feels like to walk into a room of other, you know, senior leaders and senior executives when you know that you're the only BAME person in the room, in this case, a Black person. And he said the pressure that you feel under to perform because you're not only representing yourself, you're representing your community. So any failure you feel is not just, you know, your failure alone. And in that regard, it's a challenge not having other senior role models to identify with, you know, to coach you through the realities and the challenges of these situations. I would say that as I progressed through my career, I have had some wonderful female coaches and mentors, and two in particular stand out for me. And I have no doubt in my mind that I would not be where I am today if it was not for the support and the coaching and the confidence that these two mentors gave me. And so in turn, I do my best to mentor and coach and support those people in my network. And, you know, so I would encourage everyone out there to seek out that trusted coach or mentor. And undoubtedly, they will get as much from the coaching relationship as you will get yourself.
I couldn't agree more, and obviously my story told that, and we all hope that we give back, but I think it's a two-way street, isn't it? And the weight of responsibility on your colleagues' shoulders, really insightful for us all, I think. So I'd like to come to Liselotte now. So what examples have you seen within your own organisation and other organisations that really can provide that support that we're talking about here?
Yes, and I think, first of all, my own organization here is pan-European, so we are not dealing with just one culture. So we are dealing with many cultures, and that's an aspect we also need to take into account. But irrespectively of that, I think what we have been in my own organization and what I also have experienced in other bigger tech organizations is, first of all, focus and putting in rules basically on diversity when we are hiring. So we need to see candidates from different age, gender, and so on. So you always have that aspect into your recruitment processes. And that, of course, are feeding into how your culture and your structure are working on a daily basis. But it's also about the leadership approach. So the culture is to, you know, how to embrace a diversified team, culturally, gender, again, age, because I think age is an equal big problem here. That youngers have very difficulties to be heard in teams and so on. And I would say on the backflip, if I may put it like that, on the pandemic, I hope we are there now. We are reopening. One thing that I really can see are helping women are the hybrid workplace. So we see more applicants for positions now, because there is the opportunity to work part-time from home and part-time from office. And that is something that the flexibility built in, so you can, I would say also, as we have heard here before, part-time work when the children are small and so on. That is something that we also need to make a place for. And the other thing that I would also say here is we have taken the opportunity to implement the agile work methodology. Maybe we have tweaked the concept a little bit, but we have worked it in with diversified team, but also I would say the talents and the skill set, Anita, that you were alluding to from your own experience in the self-running or self-managed teams. It's very obviously that when you doesn't have a firm hierarchy and structure, you need to do the self-management. Then the skills that you were on communicating, team orientation, how to collaborate, how to plan efficient and so on, those are skills that are very obviously for also the very techy guys and girls that are in the teams. So I would say those two is something, or three elements we have put into Fadata. And I would not say we are there yet, but at least I think we have taken some steps.
That's fantastic. And from everything I see about Fadata, I think that's very, very visible and very true. So thank you. Ayman, I'd really like to come to you next and pick up a range of questions actually that are coming through. And thank you everyone to keep bringing the questions through. They really are making it easier for us to address what you're interested in. But Ayman, there's a lot of interest in the topics we've been talking around about coaching and support to really help people with that self-doubt. And a specific question about particularly around young Black women who are underrepresented in technical senior roles. So I wonder what you've experienced and what you have personally done to encourage that sort of environment. And is that something that you can scale, or do you just have to leave that for individuals to deal with?
Yes. So that's an excellent question, because actually, I mean, coaching is definitely an important lever and element of it, but it's of a whole system. Let's say, if your company or environment doesn't promote diversity and inclusiveness and gender diversity as a value, your coaching would only be helping you to basically align to values which might not be your own values. So it's basically how to better adapt to something which is already unfair or unjust, right? So it's a whole management system you need to put in place to basically be able to say, gender diversity in technology, as an example, for EY now is a core value. It's something that we're promoting heavily. It starts from the top, but it's now become actually a very important element of the values we promote. So some behaviors which were possible, 10 years ago in meetings are no more possible today. Once you have that, then coaching becomes actually a very interesting element where you're basically working around how you can just feel empowered, right, and how you can just put yourself as in the front run when you are legitimate about an idea, and not say I'll not do it. So then it becomes actually a very interesting element. But and the experience it's a very, let's say, case by case orientation. In some cases, I've been hearing people saying, I don't need coaching. All I need is just to recognize the work I've been doing. And it's more a managerial behavior that would be required. So yes, important, but it's a piece of a whole system, I think.
But if I could just follow on, I agree, but I just picking up on another question that's coming through. Are organizations doing enough, in your view, and both within your own organization, but obviously you consult with a vast range of organizations. Are organizations doing enough to address non-inclusive behaviors at a leadership level? So we can talk about coaching and we can talk about the individual there, but are organizations actually doing enough?
I would say all the organizations we work with or for are now actually putting this as a priority, but it's a transition. We are in a transition phase. So I believe truly that we are, some of them are doing like something like, let's say, diversity washing, like the greenwashing, if you like, for ESG right now. And because, as I mentioned, we've been doing this at EY for a long time. It takes years actually for behaviors to change, for the management systems to change, for and add to that the culture of countries where we might be present and where this might be more difficult. So I think we now are in a new era, let's say, in terms of accepting diversity. It's definitely the start of the journey and not the end of the journey. I believe that it only happens by getting actually more diversity in the leadership. And we're still not there yet. Our clients are still far away from that. And I think there's lots to do that. Once you get actually in, and I can see it in some organization I worked for in my previous life, when you got real gender balance in leadership, everything starts to change. Behaviors start to change. When in a leadership team you have only one let's say visible minority and then 12 let's say male, it's not the same behavior than where you have actually 5 and 7 or 6 and 6. It's completely different. This has been my experience. So it's about promoting, pushing, coaching, and getting actually the gender diversity to the leadership level.
Makes sense. And Soo Ling, I'd like to come to you next and look at the generational issue here. But I've got a couple of questions for you. I mean, you work with young people in education. Is imposter syndrome something that you learn in the workplace, or does it manifest in education? And do you think that imposter syndrome is a generational issue? Do you think it's something that affects those of us, and I'll just point to myself here, who are a bit older on the panel, or do you think it's regardless?
I think regardless, definitely. Yeah, and for me,
I don't know if I'm happy or sad about that.
I think it's just fact of the matter. Yeah, and I think to answer your question, it can start from education, so it can do. So I remember for me, when I first decided to go into software engineering, so I had no previous background in software, haven't even properly touched a computer then, but I don't know, I was 17 and I thought, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to, know how to do this. So I did my undergrad in software engineering, and it was also the first time. So I'm from Malaysia, and then it was the first time I went to Australia, so to do my undergrad. And the boys there, they were so confident. Yeah, and I say boys, so it was a class of about 100. I think at the start, there were two girls, so me and another girl, but she left halfway. So I'm kind of like the only one there. And I remember it was very difficult. I felt like it was a very difficult course for me. Every time there's an exam, I'm like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do that. But the boys, they were like, oh, how did it go? Piece of cake. I remember that they always like say, piece of cake. So easy. Couldn't be better. And I was thinking, oh no, I'm so stupid. And then I remember there was this class where I was told to go to the front, to the whiteboard, to write the answer to the question. And I remember starting and I wasn't quite sure about the answer. And then the boys at the back started sniggering at me. And then I was very ashamed, and my writing kind of became smaller and smaller because I was very embarrassed. And then they started laughing even more and saying, look, it's smaller. She doesn't want us to see what she's writing. And then the lecturer just says, Soo Ling, go back to your seat. And I was like so embarrassed. And yeah, and it was like my 4-year degree was a lot of that, like worrying that I'm not good enough and it's so difficult. And it was not until the end that I kind of graduated top 3, and I won all the prizes, which meant that I got the highest marks in a lot of the courses. And then I also found out that some of the boys that were laughing at me, they barely passed. and some of them had to redo the courses. So it was then that I realized that the confidence was kind of like a front, and that really kind of adjusted my view. And then a few years ago, I was teaching a software engineering course at a London university. So it was a software engineering group project. I think like the worst thing comes out in such things like group project and software engineering stuff. And then there was this group, I think again, so she was the only female in the group. It was a group of 5. And then I remember they were doing this discussion, and then she suggested something. And then the boys, one of the boys was like saying, "You don't know anything. Why don't you just be the group secretary and take notes?" But actually her answer was the right one. So they were very mean to her, very condescending. And when they all left, I told her, "Do you know your answer was the right one, and your grades are better," and it was true. So you are better than all of them. Don't let them talk to you this way. And actually after that, for a while, like I kind of, again, it's me telling myself, well, after that I was thinking, should I have interrupted when they were mean to her? Should I have told the boys not to do that? Why did I just spend all my time on her? But after that, I'm thinking, I think other people could polish their manners off as they learn. But I think for her, she would, in the very near future, be in a situation, in a real world scenario where she's in a team, in a meeting room, and people will treat her like that. And she needs to know, and I hope she will hear me say that, you know, you have to fight for it. You have to say something. Don't let them talk to you that way. Yeah.
That is, gosh, I think we all went through such a range of emotions when you just told that story. That was incredible, and such fantastic give back there at the end. So thank you for sharing that, Soo Ling. And Orla, I wonder if I can come to you and pick up on a question that really relates to that, which is about how do you deal with organizationally some of those unsupportive behaviors that impact on women or colleagues who look different. Let's sort of position it like that. How do you deal with that at an organizational level?
I suppose, Anita, I'm in a position that I lead, as I explained, the partner organization for Microsoft. And we work with 30,000 different companies across partner organizations in the UK. And Microsoft is a huge champion of inclusion and diversity. And so many of those organizations that work with us, you know, they always want to promote the great things they're doing around inclusion and diversity. And I really do think that it starts at a leadership team level. And I've found myself in situations where I'll be the only person from Microsoft on a call talking to 4 or 5 people from the leadership team of a partner organization where they're talking about the brilliant things they do for inclusion and diversity. But I'm afraid it's 4 white men that are sitting opposite me or, you know, at the other end of the screen. And I'm in the position I do because, you know, leadership, I think, you know, inclusion and diversity and the behaviors have to be driven top down. And if you're going to champion inclusion and diversity, you should be really living it, you know, across the entire organization and from the top of your organization. So that's probably the main thing that stands out for me at this stage. I think it's incumbent on all of us as leaders, regardless of whether we're female, we're BAME, we're male, we're white, whatever, to really believe and live those values from the top of the organization downwards.
Absolutely. And for just picking up on the BAME thing there, I'm reminded that across Europe that's not necessarily a recognised term. So really what we're talking about here is visible minorities. And Liselotte, again, you talked about the fact you're a cross-European organisation. Anything to add from that leadership dimension?
Yeah, I might just say one thing here, and that is when I myself was a young manager, I reached out to other females role models, and my experience was that they were not very helpful. On the contrary, I think they were very afraid of being biased because I was a woman and they were a woman and so on. And that is something that I have decided I will not be afraid of that. So as a female CEO, I will really, promote women, and my particular topic is this. There can be other minority groups that I really would like to work with as well, but in this context, it's women. So that is something, and I think turning young managers down and not want to support them by coaching, mentoring, and so on, is something that really can be hard. And I heard the opposite here on the call. Orla explained that she met one that really has made a very difference for her in her career. So that is something that I spend some time on. And I would also say in auditing, there is an expression called tone of the top. And that is something, when we are talking about impact in your organization, if you don't allow it, and it's allowed for everybody to call it, if they are excluded from meetings, if they are not listening to, and all that, that is something you simply start by a cultural change, by changing the tone of the top. It's not necessary processes and whistleblower processes and stuff like that. It's simply a cultural change, and it does take time if you come from a very male and macho kind of culture.
Tone from the top. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to draw us to a close now. We have had so many questions. I run a number of panels, and I have never seen the volume of questions coming through like this. So what we will do is we will encapsulate all of the hints and tips from this, and we will make sure that we try and cover the range of questions that have come in. And there's one that has particularly impacted me that says, sometimes I feel mentally crippled with the fear or worry that I may not be able to do the next new task or take on the new responsibility. And I think that thank you for, I won't name you, but thank you for putting in that comment. Because I think that really sums up what imposter syndrome is all about. And I would, on behalf of the whole panel, I think what we would say to that and what we would say to you is that it is a combination of all of the things that we have talked about today. The organizations that we either work within or that we lead need to have that tone from the top. We do need to have that focus on coaching and mentoring. We do need to have the role models, but I also come back to that concept of, do you know what? Embrace and take the power from what you're feeling and use that to propel you. Use it to prepare. Use it to and have confidence from everybody who has shared today their own experiences, that you're not alone, and that you can, it can be an empowering feeling for you, as well as something that clearly can feel crippling at time. So thank you so much for your active participation. Thank you so much to Ayman, Soo Ling, Orla, Liselotte for your incredible sharing and your amazing experiences today. It would be massively helpful for us for all of you who are participating today, if you could stay on at the end of this and just fill in the survey that's pop up. It's really brief, but our next session is in December, and we want to make it about what you want to talk about. So please do fill it in. Please give us the feedback. Thank you for joining, and thank you to my fellow panel members. That has been an inspiring session. Thank you and goodbye.